The stranger arrived in Verdi, Nevada on a Tuesday morning in July 1878, riding a dusty mule and wearing a dress so faded it might have once been blue. Penelope Morgan climbed down from her saddle with the careful movements of someone who had traveled far, her bonnet shadowing a face that bore neither paint nor pretension. And when she spoke to the liveryman about boarding her animal, her voice carried the soft cadence of good breeding deliberately tamped down to something unremarkable. Xavier Stanton noticed her from across the street, where he was loading supplies onto his wagon, pausing mid-lift with a sack of grain balanced against his shoulder. She was plain in the way summer grass was plain, he thought. Nothing that would turn heads, but nothing offensive either. He watched her count out coins for the liveryman with precision, her fingers bare of rings, her dress hanging loose enough to disguise whatever figure she might possess beneath it. When she turned toward the boarding house, he caught a glimpse of her face, young and unmarked by hardship despite the road dust, maybe 22 or 23 if he had to guess, and something in the way she held herself made him think of a songbird pretending to be a sparrow. Xavier was 26, tall and weathered from years of ranching in the Nevada territory, his face honest and open in the way that made people trust him with their secrets and their money. He had taken over his father's spread 3 years back when consumption had claimed the old man, and he had worked himself near to death keeping it running through drought and harsh winters. His hands were calloused, his back was strong, and his prospects were decent enough that half the marriageable women in Verdi had set their caps at him at one time or another. He had turned them all down gently, not because he found them wanting but because something in him was waiting, though for what he could not have said until that moment when Penelope Morgan stepped into the dusty street and squinted up at the buildings, as though cataloging everything she saw. She took a room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, the cheapest in town, a narrow space on the second floor that looked out onto the alley where cats fought over scraps. Mrs. Henderson, a widow with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, sized up her new tenant with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen every type of person the West could produce. "You running from something or running to something?" Mrs. Henderson asked as she handed over the key. "Neither," Penelope said, her voice mild as milk. "Just traveling. Traveling costs money. You got work lined up. I will find something. I am not afraid of hard work." Mrs. Henderson sniffed, but she pocketed the week's rent Penelope had paid in advance without further comment. The coins were silver, clean and bright, not the worn and clipped pieces that usually crossed her palm. She filed that detail away for later consideration. Penelope spent her first afternoon in Verdi walking the town's single main street, taking in the saloon and the general store, the bank that looked prosperous despite the remote location, the church with its whitewashed boards already graying from dust and sun. She bought bread and cheese at the store, counting out her coins carefully, and she asked the proprietor about work in a voice that expected nothing and demanded less. "Kitchen work, maybe," the man said, scratching his jaw. "Mrs. Chen, who runs the restaurant, might need help, or there is washing. Mrs. Patterson takes in laundry." "Thank you," Penelope said. "I will inquire." She did both that evening, and by the time the sun had set behind the Sierra Nevada peaks to the west, she had secured both positions, washing dishes at the restaurant in the mornings and taking in laundry 3 afternoons a week. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover her room and board, but she accepted it without negotiation. Mrs. Chen, a compact woman who had come from Guangdong province 15 years earlier, watched her new employee with curious eyes. "You talk like you had education," Mrs. Chen observed. "Not many educated women washing dishes." "Education does not put food on the table," Penelope replied, rolling up her sleeves. Where do you want me to start? Xavier came into the restaurant 2 days later for breakfast, as he did every Friday when he came to town for supplies. He sat at his usual table near the window and ordered coffee and eggs, exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Chen in the easy way of long acquaintance. He was halfway through his meal when Penelope emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of clean dishes, and he watched her navigate between the tables with economical grace, her head down, her manner self-effacing. "Who is that?" he asked Mrs. Chen when she refilled his coffee. "New girl, Penelope. Good worker, very quiet. She new to town, came earlier this week. You interested?" Mrs. Chen's eyes glinted with amusement. "Just curious," Xavier said, but he left an extra-large tip that day, and when he passed Penelope on his way out, he tipped his hat to her and said, "Morning, miss." "Good morning," she replied, meeting his eyes for just a moment before looking away. They were gray, he noticed, the color of sage smoke, and utterly unreadable. Over the following weeks, Xavier found reasons to be in town more often than strictly necessary. He started taking breakfast at the restaurant twice a week, then 3 times, sitting at the same table and ordering the same meal while stealing glances at the woman who moved through the dining room like a ghost. He learned her patterns. She arrived before dawn to start the dishes. She worked through the morning rush without pause. She left precisely at noon to walk back to the boarding house where she would eat a solitary lunch before heading to Mrs. Patterson's to collect laundry. She spoke only when spoken to, dressed in the same rotation of 3 plain dresses, and seemed to have no friends and no interests beyond her work. "You should just talk to her, Mrs. Chen said one morning after Xavier had spent the better part of an hour nursing cold coffee while watching Penelope scrub tables. "She will not bite." "I do not want to make her uncomfortable," Xavier said. "She seems like she wants to be left alone." "Or maybe she is alone because no one talks to her," Mrs. Chen pointed out. "She is not unfriendly, just careful." That afternoon, Xavier contrived to be leaving the general store at the same moment Penelope was entering it. He held the door for her, and she thanked him with quiet courtesy. "You are Penelope, right?" he said. "I have seen you at the restaurant. I am Xavier Stanton. I have a ranch north of town." "How do you do?" she said, her expression polite but distant. "Listen, I know this is forward, but there is a dance at the church hall Saturday night. Would you consider accompanying me?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the unsettling feeling of being assessed and measured against some internal standard he could not see. Finally, she shook her head. "That is kind of you, but I do not think so. Thank you for the invitation." "Can I ask why not?" "I am not looking for company," she said simply. "Please excuse me. I need to make my purchases before the store closes." She moved past him into the dim interior of the store, and Xavier was left standing on the boardwalk feeling obscurely rejected and more intrigued than ever. He was not accustomed to being turned down, and it rankled, but beneath the wounded pride was a growing curiosity. What was Penelope Morgan hiding behind that facade of humility? And why did she work herself to exhaustion for wages that would barely keep her alive? He made inquiries, as subtly as he could. Mrs. Henderson reported that Penelope kept to herself, paid her rent on time, and received no mail. The liveryman said she had sold her mule after the first week, which suggested she was not planning to leave town anytime soon. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Penelope's hands were too soft for someone accustomed to hard labor, and that she washed clothes with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been taught proper technique, rather than learned it through necessity. "She is quality," Mrs. Patterson concluded. "Fallen on hard times, I expect. Probably some man involved. There usually is." Xavier did not think it was a man, though he could not have said why. There was something in the way Penelope carried herself, a kind of self-possession that spoke of choices made rather than circumstances endured. She was not running from scandal or heartbreak. She was here deliberately, for reasons of her own, and the mystery of it consumed him more with each passing day. The summer heat intensified, turning Verdi into a furnace. The temperature regularly climbed above 100 degrees, and the townspeople moved slowly through streets that shimmered with heat haze. Penelope continued her routine without variation, though Xavier noticed she looked increasingly worn, her face pale beneath the bonnet she wore constantly, dark circles appearing under her eyes. He worried about her in ways he could not articulate, wanting to help but not knowing how without overstepping boundaries she had made clear. In August, his opportunity came unexpectedly. He was in the general store when he overheard Mrs. Patterson telling the proprietor that Penelope had fainted while carrying laundry and had been confined to bed by Mrs. Henderson. "Heat sickness," Mrs. Patterson said with a shake of her head. "That girl works too hard. I told her to rest, but she would not listen." Xavier left his shopping half-finished and went directly to the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson answered his knock with raised eyebrows. "Mr. Stanton, what can I do for you? I heard Miss Morgan is ill. I wanted to see if she needs anything." "She needs rest and fluids, which I am providing," Mrs. Henderson said tartly. "Are you courting the girl? I am concerned about her welfare." "Hum." Mrs. Henderson studied him with the penetrating gaze of a woman who had raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. "She is not receiving visitors, but I will tell her you asked after her. Please do. And if she needs anything at all, send word to me. I will cover any expenses." "I will relay the message," Mrs. Henderson said, her expression softening slightly. "That is decent of you, Mr. Stanton." Penelope spent 3 days in bed, and when she finally returned to work, she looked thinner and more fragile than ever. Xavier, eating breakfast at the restaurant the morning of her return, felt his chest tighten when he saw her moving slowly between tables, her movements careful as though she hurt all over. He waited until she came near his table, then spoke quietly. "Miss Morgan, I am glad to see you recovered. Please sit for a moment." "I am working," she said. "Mrs. Chen will not mind if you take a brief rest. Please." She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair across from him with visible relief. Up close, he could see the fine tremor in her hands, the gray tinge to her skin. "You are pushing yourself too hard," he said gently. "This work is going to kill you." "I need to work," she said. "I have to pay my way." "There are easier ways to pay your way. I need help at the ranch. Cooking, cleaning, laundry. The work is no harder than what you are doing now, but at least you would be out of this heat and I pay better." She looked at him sharply. "I will not be any man's mistress, Mr. Stanton, no matter how prettily you phrase the offer." He felt his face flush. "That is not what I am proposing. I would never." "Good Lord, Miss Morgan, I am asking if you want honest employment, nothing more. You would have your own room and I am gone most of the day working the ranch. My intentions are completely honorable. Then why would you offer this to a stranger?" "Because you are working yourself into the ground for no good reason I can see, and because—" He stopped, searching for words. "Because there is something about you that makes me think you deserve better than this. Call it instinct." She was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face with that same assessing look. Finally, she said, "I will consider it. May I give you my answer tomorrow, of course. Take all the time you need." That evening, Mrs. Henderson found Penelope sitting in the boarding house parlor, staring at nothing. "You thinking about taking that rancher's offer?" the older woman asked. "How did you know about that, small town?" "Word travels. For what it is worth, Xavier Stanton is a good man. Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. If he says his intentions are honorable, they are. I do not doubt his intentions, Penelope said slowly. I doubt my ability to maintain this fiction much longer. I am so tired, Mrs. Henderson. Tired in ways I did not know a person could be tired. Then why do it? Why live like this when you clearly were not raised to it? Penelope looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. Because I needed to know I could. I needed to know what life was like for people who have to work for every scrap. My whole life I have been insulated, sheltered. I wanted to understand. Understand what? What matters? What is real? Penelope rubbed her temples. I know that sounds foolish. It sounds like something a very young, very privileged person would think, Mrs. Henderson said, not unkindly. But you have made your point now, haven't you? You have proved whatever it was you needed to prove. Maybe it is time to stop suffering for the sake of it. The next morning, Penelope found Xavier at the restaurant and told him she would accept his offer. They agreed she would start the following Monday, giving her time to finish out the week with Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Patterson. When she told Mrs. Chen she was leaving, the restaurant owner looked at her with knowing eyes. That rancher, he is a good man. You could do worse. It is just employment, Penelope said. Nothing more. We will see. Xavier spent the weekend preparing for Penelope's arrival, cleaning the ranch house more thoroughly than he had in months, airing out the spare bedroom that had been his mother's before she passed, making sure there were provisions in the kitchen and fresh linens on the bed. The ranch itself was modest by the standards of Nevada cattle operations. 300 acres of scrubland and sage with a creek running through the property that provided reliable water, even in dry years. He ran about 100 head of cattle and broke horses on the side, doing well enough to be comfortable but not well enough to be wealthy. The house was adobe and timber, 2 stories with wide porches that provided shade from the relentless sun. His mother had planted cottonwoods around it years ago, and they had grown tall enough now to give the place a sheltered feeling, an oasis in the desert. He found himself seeing it through Penelope's eyes as he worked, wondering if she would find it pleasant or disappointing, wanting obscurely for her to approve. He collected her Monday morning in his wagon, and they rode the 5 miles to the ranch in near silence. Penelope sat stiffly beside him, her small carpetbag on her lap, her expression hidden beneath her bonnet. When they arrived and he helped her down from the wagon, she stood for a moment looking at the house and the land stretching away in all directions, and something in her posture eased. "This is beautiful," she said quietly. "You think so? Most people think it is pretty desolate." "No, it is honest, clean." She turned to him. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Stanton. I will work hard for you." "I know you will, and please call me Xavier. We will be living under the same roof. Might as well be on familiar terms. Then you should call me Penelope." He showed her through the house, pointing out the kitchen and the parlor, the room that would be hers, the office where he kept his books. She took it all in with quiet attention, and when they reached the kitchen, she ran her hand over the smooth pine table with something like affection. "My mother used to have a table like this," she said. "She would knead bread on it. I remember watching her hands in the dough, how strong they were." "Your mother passed." "Yes, 5 years ago, my father too more recently." She said it without emotion, stating facts. "I have no family left, I am sorry, that must be hard. It is what it is." She turned away from the table. "What would you like me to start with?" They fell into a routine over the following weeks that felt surprisingly natural. Penelope proved to be a capable cook, despite her obvious lack of practice, following recipes from his mother's old cookbook with studious concentration. She kept the house clean without making a fuss about it, did laundry efficiently, and seemed content to spend her evenings reading in the parlor while Xavier worked on his accounts or repaired tack. They spoke over dinner about small things, the weather and the cattle and the state of the garden, conversations that were pleasant without being intimate. But Xavier found himself increasingly aware of her presence in ways that went beyond the practical. He noticed how she hummed while she cooked, tuneless little melodies that seemed to come without thought. He noticed the way she stood on the porch in the evenings, looking west toward the mountains with an expression of peace he had never seen on her face in town. He noticed that beneath the shapeless dresses, she was not plain at all, that her features had a delicate symmetry, that when she forgot to be guarded, her smile could transform her entire face. He was falling in love with her. He realized one night while lying in bed listening to the coyotes call. The understanding came without drama or revelation, simply a recognition of something that had been growing steadily since the morning she first arrived in Verdi. He loved her quietness and her dignity. He loved the way she treated his home with respect, the way she had coaxed his half-dead vegetable garden back to life, the way she listened when he talked about his plans for the ranch as though his dreams mattered. The question was whether she felt anything for him beyond gratitude for employment, and he was afraid to push, afraid to ruin the comfortable equilibrium they had established. So he waited and watched and hoped. In September, the heat finally broke, and with it came trouble. Xavier had been in town picking up supplies when he heard that the Territorial Bank had been robbed the night before, the safe blown and nearly $10,000 taken. The robbery had been clean and professional, no shots fired, the thieves long gone by the time anyone discovered what had happened. The town was buzzing with speculation and outrage, and the territorial marshal had been summoned from Carson City to investigate. Xavier thought little of it beyond the general concern any citizen would feel, but when he returned to the ranch that evening and saw Penelope's face, he knew immediately that something was wrong. She was pale, her hands trembling as she served dinner, and she barely touched her own food. "What is it?" he asked finally. "What has upset you?" "Nothing. I am just tired, Penelope." He reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. "Please, talk to me." She looked at their joined hands for a long moment, then slowly pulled away. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The bank robbery. It is my fault." Xavier stared at her. "What do you mean it is your fault? You were here all night. I saw you." "Not directly my fault, but I know who did it, or I think I do." She pressed her hands to her face. "Oh God, this is all such a mess." "Start from the beginning," Xavier said carefully. "Tell me everything." And so she did. The story came out haltingly, punctuated by long silences and moments when she seemed unable to continue. Her father, she explained, had been Marcus Morgan, one of the wealthiest railroad magnates in the country. When he died 8 months earlier, he had left Penelope a fortune that ran to several $1 million, administered through a series of trusts and investments. She had been living in San Francisco under the guardianship of her father's business partner, a man named Theodore Walsh, who had managed her affairs and her life with suffocating control. "He wanted to marry me," Penelope said, her voice flat. "I was part of the assets he intended to acquire along with my father's shares in the railroad. When I refused him, he became difficult. He controlled my money, my access to everything. I realized that if I stayed, I would either have to marry him or spend the rest of my life as his prisoner." So she had fled, taking only what she could carry and leaving behind her name and her fortune. She had come to Nevada because it was far from California and remote enough that she thought she could disappear. The money she had been living on was from the small amount of cash she had managed to withdraw before leaving, $50 that she had been eking out with careful thrift. "But what does this have to do with the bank robbery?" Xavier asked. "Because Theodore would not let me go that easily." I am worth too much. He would have hired people to find me, investigators, maybe worse. And if someone went through the banking records in Verdi, they would see that I made an inquiry last week about establishing an account. I used a false name, but I had to provide references, documentation. If the right person looked at those papers. She trailed off, her face miserable. I may have led them straight here, and if they robbed the bank, it might have been to cover their tracks, to destroy records. Xavier sat back, his mind racing. It was a wild story, almost unbelievable, except that it explained so much. The way she spoke, the softness of her hands, the education that showed through despite her efforts to hide it. The careful way she rationed her money as though she was accustomed to thinking in terms of assets and liabilities. The watchfulness, the constant sense that she was hiding something. "You believe me?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I believe you." "But Penelope, if this Walsh character is as dangerous as you say, you are not safe here, if he knows you are in Verdi." "I know I need to leave, tonight if possible. I cannot put you in danger." "Absolutely not. If you run now, you will be running forever." "No." Xavier stood, his jaw set. "We face this together. We go to the marshal, we tell him everything, and we make sure you are protected. The marshal will not believe me. I have no proof, no evidence. It will be my word against Theodore's, and he has money and influence. I have nothing." "You have me," Xavier said. "And you have the truth. That counts for something." She looked at him with something like wonder in her gray eyes. "Why would you do this? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you are brave and honest, and you have been hurt by people who should have protected you. I know that." He stopped, took a breath. "I know that I care about you, Penelope, more than I should probably admit, and I will be damned if I let some railroad tycoon hurt you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, the first real emotion he had seen from her beyond carefully controlled pleasantness. "Xavier, we will figure this out," he said firmly. "I promise. But first, you need to tell me everything. Every detail about this Theodore Walsh, every bit of evidence you have. We build a case and then we take it to the authorities." They talked through the night, Xavier taking notes while Penelope recounted everything she could remember about her father's business, about Theodore Walsh's dealings, about the circumstances of her father's death that she had always found suspicious. By dawn, they had assembled a picture of potential fraud and embezzlement that, if true, would send Walsh to prison for decades. "Your father's death," Xavier said slowly. "You think Walsh killed him. I cannot prove it. But father was healthy, and then suddenly he took ill and died within days. The doctors said it was a heart condition, but there was never any history of heart trouble. And the moment he was gone, Theodore took control of everything so quickly, as though he had been planning for it. We need to wire the authorities in San Francisco. If there is an investigation into Walsh's business practices, your testimony would be crucial. And in the meantime, you stay here, and I make sure you are safe." The marshal arrived at the ranch 2 days later, a lanky man named Pierce, who had the careful eyes of someone who missed nothing. Xavier had sent word that he had information about the bank robbery, and Pierce came prepared to take statements. Penelope told her story again, her voice steady now, and Pierce listened without interrupting until she finished. "That is quite a tale, Miss Morgan," he said. "You have any proof of who you are?" Penelope hesitated, then reached into her dress and pulled out a small leather folder she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside was a photograph, slightly faded, of a young woman in an elaborate dress standing beside an older man in formal attire. The woman was unmistakably Penelope, though her hair was styled differently and she wore jewels that probably cost more than Xavier's ranch. "That is my father and me at a reception in San Francisco last year," she said. The photograph was taken by Edward Mybridge. You can verify it if you need to. Pierce studied the photograph, then looked at Penelope with new respect. I will be damned. You really are Marcus Morgan's daughter, I really am. And this Theodore Walsh, you think he is behind the bank robbery? I think he is trying to find me. Whether he personally ordered the robbery or whether it was done by whoever he hired to track me, I cannot say. But the timing is too coincidental. Pierce nodded slowly. I will wire the San Francisco police, see what they know about Walsh. In the meantime, you should stay out of sight. If there are men looking for you, we do not want to make it easy for them. Over the following week, more information trickled in. The territorial marshal confirmed that Theodore Walsh was indeed under investigation for fraud and embezzlement related to Marcus Morgan's railroad holdings. Several of Morgan's former business partners had come forward with suspicions about Walsh's accounting practices. The investigation had been stalled for lack of evidence and witnesses, but with Penelope's testimony, they might be able to build a case. There was also news of the bank robbers. 2 men had been arrested in Reno trying to exchange marked bills, and under questioning, they had admitted to the Verdi robbery. They claimed they had been hired by a lawyer from San Francisco to retrieve documents from the bank's safe, though they refused to name the lawyer. The money, they insisted, had been a bonus for a job well done. It is all starting to unravel, Xavier told Penelope one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. Walsh's whole scheme is coming apart. He will fight back, Penelope said quietly. Men like him always do. He will hire lawyers, bribe officials. My word against his will not be enough. Then we make sure it is not just your word. We find other witnesses, other evidence. We make the case so strong he cannot wriggle out of it. She turned to look at him, her expression soft in the fading light. You have done so much for me already, Xavier, more than I had any right to expect. Why? I told you I care about you. But why? I lied to you about who I was. I put you in danger. By all rights, you should be furious with me. Xavier took a deep breath. This was the moment, he realized, where he either spoke his truth or lost his chance forever. Because somewhere between watching you scrub dishes in Mrs. Chen's restaurant and sitting here with you now, I fell in love with you, Penelope. Not with Marcus Morgan's daughter or the heiress to a railroad fortune. With you, the woman who nearly worked herself to death to understand what real life was like. The woman who reads poetry in the evenings and hums when she cooks. The woman who has more courage in her little finger than most men have in their entire bodies. She stared at him, her eyes wide. Xavier, I know you probably do not feel the same way, he continued quickly. I know I am just a rancher with a small spread and modest prospects, and you are accustomed to much more. But I needed you to know. Whatever happens with Walsh and the investigation, I needed you to know that you are loved. Truly loved, for exactly who you are. For a long moment she said nothing, and Xavier felt his heart sink. Then she reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. You foolish, wonderful man, she said, her voice thick with tears. Do you not realize that you are everything I have been looking for? Not the wealth or the status or the grand life in San Francisco. You, a man who sees me, truly sees me and loves me anyway. A man who treats me as an equal, who asks what I think and listens to my answers. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Then you. I love you too, she said. I have been falling in love with you since that first morning when you tipped your hat to me in the restaurant, treating me with respect even though I was just a dishwasher. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you care for this land. I love that you believed me when I told you my story, even though it sounded insane. I love you, Xavier Stanton, with everything I am. He kissed her then, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to frame his face. She tasted like the peppermint tea she had been drinking, sweet and clean, and Xavier felt something in his chest crack open, flooding him with warmth and light. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know this is fast. I know we should probably wait until all this mess with Walsh is sorted, but I do not want to wait. Marry me, Penelope. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 days later in the little church in Verdi, with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Chen and half the town in attendance. Penelope wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew from muslin, and Xavier wore his best suit, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the congregation erupted in applause. At the reception afterward in the church hall, people crowded around to offer congratulations and advice, and Xavier watched his new wife navigate the attention with quiet grace, her hand never leaving his. Marshal Pierce attended the wedding, and afterward, he pulled Xavier aside. "Just got word from San Francisco," he said quietly. "Walsh has been arrested. Turns out Marcus Morgan's death was not natural after all. The body was exhumed and they found enough arsenic in him to kill 3 men. Walsh's housekeeper testified that he had been administering medicine to Morgan personally in the days before his death." Xavier felt cold rage wash through him. "He murdered her father. Looks that way. He will hang for it, likely. And with the fraud charges on top of it, Miss Morgan's fortune is secure. The courts will restore her access to everything." "She does not care about the money," Xavier said. "She just wanted to be free." "Well, she is free now, and she is one lucky woman to have found you." Xavier looked across the hall to where Penelope was laughing at something Mrs. Chen had said, her face alight with genuine joy. "I am the lucky one," he said. That night, alone finally in the ranch house that was now their home, Xavier and Penelope came together with the tenderness of people who had waited a long time for something precious. She was nervous, he could tell, her hands trembling as she undid the buttons of her dress, and he went slowly, kissing her fears away, showing her with touch and whisper that she was safe. She was loved. She was home. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, she traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "I need to tell you something," she said. "About the money. You do not have to talk about that now." "Yes, I do. I need you to understand." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "My fortune, it is substantial, more substantial than you probably realize. When the courts restore my access to it, we will be very wealthy, Xavier, not just comfortable, wealthy." "That does not change anything," he said firmly. "I did not marry you for money. I do not want your money. I know that. That is why I want to share it with you. We could expand the ranch, buy more land, build something real and lasting. Or we could travel, see the world, do anything you have ever dreamed of. The money is just a tool, Xavier. It is not who I am, but it could give us choices, freedom, a good life together." He considered this, stroking her hair. "I will not lie and say money would not make some things easier, but I do not want to change who we are. I like our life here, the simplicity of it." "So do I," she said. "So we keep the life we have and use the money to secure it. We invest wisely, we help people who need helping. We build a legacy not for us but for our children, for the future." "Children," Xavier repeated, a smile spreading across his face. "I like the sound of that." "Me too," she said, and kissed him again. The weeks that followed were a kind of idyll. The world beyond the ranch might have been in turmoil, with lawyers and investigators sorting through the wreckage of Theodore Walsh's schemes, but on the ranch itself, there was only peace. Xavier taught Penelope to ride properly. putting her on his gentlest mare and leading her around the property until she found her seat and her confidence. She taught him the poetry she loved, reading aloud in the evenings from the slim volumes she had carried with her from San Francisco. They worked side by side during the day, her presence making even the most tedious chores feel purposeful, and they came together at night with growing passion and tenderness. In November, official word came that Penelope's inheritance had been fully restored, and that Theodore Walsh had been convicted of murder and fraud. He was sentenced to hang, a fate Xavier felt was too good for a man who had killed for money and tried to imprison a young woman for his own gain. Penelope received the news with quiet satisfaction but no triumph. "I wish none of it had happened," she told Xavier. "I wish my father was still alive and I was still ignorant of how cruel people could be, but I cannot change the past. I can only move forward." "Then we move forward together," he said. With her inheritance secure, Penelope could have done anything, gone anywhere. She could have returned to San Francisco society, reclaimed her place in the world of wealth and privilege. Instead, she chose to stay in Nevada, to make her life with Xavier on the ranch they both loved. She did make some changes, though. She hired a lawyer to manage her investments and ensure the money was working for good causes, funding schools and hospitals and programs for widows and orphans. She bought the land adjoining Xavier's ranch, doubling their holdings, and invested in better breeding stock and equipment. But she never put on airs, never used her wealth to set herself above others. In town, people knew she had money now, but she still dressed simply and spoke humbly, still helped Mrs. Chen in the restaurant sometimes when they were short-handed, still took tea with Mrs. Henderson and gossiped about town affairs. She was not pretending anymore, Xavier realized. This was who she genuinely was, a woman who valued substance over show, who had learned through hard experience what truly mattered. The town of Verdi itself began to change, not because of Penelope's wealth directly, but because of the way she used it. When the schoolhouse roof caved in during a winter storm, she paid to rebuild it and hired a trained teacher from Carson City. When drought threatened the following summer, she funded the construction of a better irrigation system that served all the ranchers in the area. When Mrs. Patterson's husband died and left her penniless, Penelope bought the laundry business and made Mrs. Patterson the manager at a good salary. People were grateful but also a bit bewildered. They were not accustomed to the wealthy caring about their problems, and Penelope's quiet philanthropy made them uncomfortable at first. But Xavier, who understood his wife better than anyone, explained it in a way they could grasp. "She knows what it is like to have nothing," he told Mrs. Henderson over coffee one morning. "She lived it, right here in Verdi. She worked until she collapsed, counted every penny, understood what real struggle meant. Now that she has the means to help, how could she not? She is a remarkable woman," Mrs. Henderson said. "You are a lucky man, Xavier Stanton." "I know," Xavier said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and joy and deepening intimacy. Penelope learned to run the ranch as well as Xavier did, riding out with him to check cattle, helping with branding and calving, keeping the books with the precision of someone who understood finance instinctively. Xavier learned to value her counsel on business decisions, discovered that her education and experience made her a shrewd negotiator and a clever strategist. They were partners in the truest sense, each complementing the other's strengths, each supporting the other's weaknesses. In the spring of 1880, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after dinner, her face a mixture of joy and apprehension, and he swept her into his arms and spun her around the kitchen while she laughed and protested. "A baby," he kept saying. We are having a baby. Are you happy? She asked, though the answer was written plainly on his face. Happy does not begin to cover it, he said. Penelope, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A partnership, a purpose, and now this. A family, our family. The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down, and Xavier hovered anxiously, trying to help in ways that were more endearing than effective. As she grew larger, the summer heat became oppressive, and she spent much of her time in the coolest parts of the house, reading and sewing baby clothes with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Chen, who had appointed themselves as unofficial grandmothers. The baby came in late September, after a labor that lasted 20 hours and left Xavier pacing the porch in an agony of helplessness, while the midwife and Mrs. Henderson attended to Penelope. When the baby's cry finally rang out, high and strong, Xavier burst into the bedroom to find his wife exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced infant wrapped in blankets. "A boy," Penelope said, her voice hoarse. "We have a son, Xavier." He knelt beside the bed, looking at the tiny face of his child, and felt tears slide down his cheeks. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking James," Penelope said. "After your father, James Henry Stanton." "Perfect," Xavier whispered. "He is perfect." Fatherhood transformed Xavier in ways he had not anticipated. The fierce protectiveness he felt for Penelope extended to this small, helpless creature who depended on them for everything. He would stand over the cradle for hours watching James sleep, marveling at the miniature perfection of fingers and toes, the way the baby's mouth moved as he dreamed. Penelope, despite her exhaustion, seemed to bloom into motherhood, nursing their son with serene patience, singing him songs in French that her own mother had taught her. The ranch continued to prosper. With Penelope's investments, they were able to expand the herd and improve the infrastructure, building new barns and corrals, fencing the property properly. Xavier hired 2 ranch hands to help with the daily work, giving him more time to spend with his growing family. The rhythm of their lives settled into something sustainable, a balance of work and rest, solitude and community. When James was 6 months old, Penelope received a letter from San Francisco that made her face go pale. Xavier found her in the parlor, the letter crumpled in her hand, staring at nothing. "What is it?" he asked, crouching beside her chair. "Theodore's sister," Penelope said dully. "She is suing me. She claims that her brother was innocent, that I fabricated evidence against him. She wants half my inheritance as compensation for her brother's wrongful death." Xavier felt fury rise in his chest. "She cannot do that. Walsh was convicted. The evidence was overwhelming. She can try, and even if she does not win, the legal battle will be expensive and ugly. It will drag everything back into the public eye. My father's murder, the trial, all of it." "Then we fight her," Xavier said. "We have good lawyers, Penelope. We will not let her take anything from us." The lawsuit dragged on for nearly a year, a constant shadow over their happiness. Penelope had to travel to San Francisco twice to give depositions, and each time she returned exhausted and withdrawn, the old wariness creeping back into her eyes. Xavier accompanied her both times, and he saw for himself the world she had left behind. The grand houses and elaborate dinners, the people who smiled while calculating your worth, the constant performance of status. He hated it viscerally, and was profoundly grateful when they could return to Nevada and the clean simplicity of the ranch. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed, the judge ruling that Walsh's guilt had been proven beyond doubt and that his sister had no claim on Penelope's inheritance. But the experience left its mark. Penelope became more protective of their privacy, more careful about who they let into their inner circle. She increased security at the ranch, hiring a foreman who had served as a lawman and knew how to spot trouble. "I will not let anyone threaten our family," she told Xavier. "Not ever again." "They would have to go through me first," Xavier said, and he meant it. Life settled again. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's gray eyes and his father's easy temperament. He learned to walk on the ranch, chasing chickens and tottering after his father while Xavier worked. Penelope, watching her son explore his world with fearless curiosity, felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. This was what she had been searching for when she fled San Francisco, she realized. Not hardship for its own sake, but authenticity. A life built on love and work and genuine connection, rather than appearance and expectation. In the summer of 1882, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Rose. The birth was easier this time, and Clara was a placid baby who slept through the night almost from the beginning, much to Penelope's relief. James was enchanted with his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and Xavier built a bigger table for the kitchen so they could all eat together as Clara grew. The ranch continued to expand, and Xavier's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher grew throughout the territory. People came from as far as Reno to buy horses he had trained, and his cattle fetched premium prices. But despite their growing prosperity, Xavier and Penelope maintained the modest lifestyle that had characterized their early years together. They added onto the house as their family grew, but they did not build a mansion. They had money for hired help, but Xavier still worked alongside his ranch hands, and Penelope still cooked and cleaned and tended her garden. "Why should we change?" Penelope said when Mrs. Henderson asked her about it one day. "We have everything we need. More money would not make us happier." "Still," Mrs. Henderson said, "you could have an easier life. You have earned it." "Maybe, but this life suits us. I spent the first 20 years of my life in ease and it did not make me happy. This, though." She gestured around the ranch, where Xavier was showing James how to rope a fence post while Clara napped in her cradle on the porch. "This is real. This is mine. I would not trade it for anything." When James was 5 and Clara was 3, they had a visitor. A lawyer from San Francisco named Robert Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen despite the shared surname, arrived at the ranch with news that Marcus Morgan's railroad holdings had been sold for a staggering sum. As the sole heir, Penelope's share of the proceeds came to $8 million. $8 million, Xavier repeated, the number incomprehensible. "That is a lot of money," Penelope finished. She looked at the lawyer. "What am I supposed to do with $8 million, Mr. Chen?" "Whatever you like, Mrs. Stanton. It is yours free and clear. The funds are already in your accounts, managed according to the instructions you gave your trustees. I am simply here to inform you and to provide any assistance you might need." After the lawyer left, Xavier and Penelope sat on the porch in stunned silence while the children played in the yard. "We could go anywhere," Xavier said finally. "Do anything. We could travel the world, live in any city we wanted. We could buy a palace if we felt like it." "Do you want those things?" Penelope asked. He thought about it honestly. The world beyond Nevada held some appeal, certainly. He would like to see the ocean, visit the cities he had only read about, but leave the ranch permanently. Live somewhere that was not this home they had built together. "No," he said. "I do not think I do. I like our life, Penelope. I like ranching and raising our children here and being part of this community. Money cannot improve on that." "Good," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Because neither do I. So we keep the money invested, we use it to do good where we can, and we stay here." "Agreed, agreed." They did travel, though. Over the next few years, they took trips to San Francisco and Denver, and once, memorably, all the way to New York City, which James found endlessly fascinating and Clara found overwhelmingly loud. They saw the ocean and the mountains and the great sweep of the plains. But they always came home to Nevada, to the ranch that was the center of their world. Penelope established a foundation to distribute charitable funds, focusing on education and opportunities for women. She funded scholarships and business loans, built libraries and meeting halls, supported suffrage efforts and labor reforms. Xavier sometimes teased her that she was going to give away all their money, but he admired her commitment to using their wealth responsibly. She had not forgotten what it was like to be powerless, and she was determined to give others the tools they needed to build better lives. In Verdi itself, Penelope's generosity transformed the town. The school became one of the best in the territory, attracting families who wanted good education for their children. The church was rebuilt in stone, permanent and solid. A proper hospital opened, staffed by trained doctors and nurses. The town grew and prospered, and while Penelope rarely took credit publicly, everyone knew who was behind the improvements. "You should run for territorial office," Marshall Pierce told her once. "You have the brains and the resources. You could do real good on a larger scale." But Penelope shook her head. "Politics is not my calling. I can do more good working behind the scenes, supporting people who have the passion for public service. My place is here, with my family and my community." Xavier was immensely proud of his wife, though he would have been proud of her with or without the philanthropy. What mattered to him was the woman she was, thoughtful and kind, fierce when defending those she loved, endlessly curious about the world, patient with their children, passionate in their private moments. She was his partner and his best friend, and even after years of marriage, he sometimes caught himself watching her across a room and marveling that she had chosen him. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. By the time he was 8, he was riding as well as most adults and helping with real ranch work. Clara was quieter, more studious, with her mother's love of reading and her father's practical nature. She would sit for hours watching the world around her, then ask questions that revealed a mind constantly analyzing and connecting. In 1887, when James was 7 and Clara was 5, Penelope gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Thomas and William. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth harrowing enough that the doctor warned against more children. Xavier, who had been terrified of losing her, was more than content with their family of 4 children. Penelope recovered slowly but completely, and the twins, despite arriving early and small, thrived under her devoted care. The ranch now employed a dozen workers full-time, and Xavier had built it into one of the most successful operations in Nevada. But success brought its own challenges. Rustlers began targeting their herds, and there were increasing tensions with smaller ranchers who resented their prosperity. Xavier tried to be a good neighbor, offering help and fair prices, but envy was a hard poison to counteract. The trouble came to a head in the spring of 1888. A group of men, led by a rancher named Dick Holloway who had been struggling since a harsh winter, attempted to steal 50 head of cattle under cover of darkness. Xavier and his ranch hands confronted them, and in the chaos that followed, shots were fired. One of the rustlers was killed, and Holloway was seriously wounded. The sheriff came from Reno to investigate, and for a tense few days, it looked like Xavier might face charges. But witnesses confirmed that the rustlers had fired first and that Xavier's men had acted in self-defense. Holloway, facing jail time, broke down and confessed that he had organized the theft out of desperation. that he was about to lose his ranch and had seen no other option. Penelope, hearing this, went to visit Holloway in the hospital. Xavier tried to stop her, arguing that the man had tried to steal from them, that he had put lives at risk, but Penelope was firm. "He made terrible choices," she said, "but I understand desperation. I understand what it feels like to have no options. Maybe I can help." She met with Holloway and offered him a deal. She would pay off his debts and give him a loan to restart his operation, interest-free, on the condition that he work with Xavier to improve his ranching practices and that he turn himself around. Holloway, stunned and ashamed, accepted. Over the following years, he became one of their staunchest allies, and his ranch began to prosper under better management. "You did not have to do that," Xavier told his wife. "He tried to ruin us." "He made a mistake born of desperation," Penelope said. "I have been in dark places too, Xavier. I know what it is like to feel like there is no way out. If we can offer a hand up instead of crushing him completely, we should." "You are a better person than I am," Xavier said. "No, I just remember what mercy feels like." The years flowed on, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family milestones. James, at 15, announced he wanted to go east to study agriculture at university. And though Xavier's heart clenched at the thought of his son leaving, he and Penelope supported the decision. Clara, at 13, was already showing signs of becoming a writer, filling notebooks with observations and stories. The twins, Thomas and William, were hellions who kept everyone on their toes with their boundless energy and creativity. In 1893, the country was hit by an economic depression that devastated many ranchers. Xavier and Penelope weathered it better than most due to their diversified investments, but they watched friends and neighbors lose everything. Penelope increased the foundation's charitable work, providing emergency loans and relief funds, while Xavier organized cooperative efforts among the ranchers to share resources and labor. Verdi itself survived the Depression relatively intact, thanks in large part to the stability Penelope's investments had brought to the town's economy. The school and hospital continued to operate, providing employment and services. The bank, which Penelope had quietly bought a controlling interest in years earlier, did not foreclose on struggling ranchers but instead worked out payment plans. The town pulled together, and the bonds between neighbors grew stronger. As Xavier approached 50 and Penelope her mid-40s, they began to think about legacy in more concrete terms. James had graduated from university and was working for the Department of Agriculture in Washington, applying scientific principles to improve farming and ranching practices nationwide. Clara had published her first novel, a sweeping historical romance that had been surprisingly successful. Thomas and William, now 14, were showing interest in different paths, Thomas drawn to veterinary medicine and William to law. "We have done well," Xavier said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained for 20 years. "Our children are launched into good lives. The ranch is prosperous. We have helped a lot of people." "No regrets?" Penelope asked. "Not a single one. You?" She thought about it, looking back over the decades since that day she had arrived in Verdi on a dusty mule, determined to escape her old life and discover what was real. She thought about the hard work and the fear, the moment Xavier had first spoken to her, the slow building of trust and love, the life they had created together. She thought about their children and the community they had helped build and the thousands of lives touched by the money she had once seen as a curse. "No regrets," she said, "only gratitude. For you, for this life, for everything we have been given." "We earned it," Xavier said, "every bit of it." In 1898, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier and Penelope threw a celebration at the ranch that drew people from all over the territory. Friends and family, ranch hands and neighbors, people they had helped over the years and people who had helped them, all gathered to honor a marriage that had become legendary in its own quiet way. The story of how they had met, of the heiress disguised as a working woman and the cowboy who had loved her for herself, had become part of local folklore. Standing before the assembled guests, Xavier raised his glass in a toast. 20 years ago, I watched a woman climb down from a mule wearing a dress so faded I could not tell what color it had been, and I thought she was the most interesting person I had ever seen. I was right. Penelope, you have been my partner, my love, my conscience, and my joy. You dressed plain and spoke humble, and I never guessed you had more money than the whole town. But even if I had known, it would not have changed how I felt. Because what I fell in love with was your heart, your courage, your stubborn determination to live authentically. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing this life. Thank you for 20 years of happiness I never imagined possible. Penelope, her eyes bright with tears, stood and kissed him to thunderous applause. Then she turned to their guests and said, I came to Verdi running from a life that was suffocating me. I found freedom, purpose, and love beyond measure. Xavier saw me when I was trying my hardest to be invisible. He valued me when I had nothing to offer but myself. And he has spent 20 years showing me every single day that I made the right choice. To my husband, my partner, my truest friend, you are the greatest treasure I ever found. The party lasted late into the night, filled with music and dancing and stories. Xavier and Penelope danced together as they had at their wedding, and though they moved a bit slower now, their steps a bit more careful, the love between them was as fierce and bright as ever. The new century arrived, bringing with it changes both large and small. The ranch transitioned slowly from cattle to more diversified agriculture, adapting to changing markets and technologies. Automobiles began appearing in Nevada, strange sputtering machines that Xavier viewed with deep suspicion and Penelope found fascinating. James married a woman he had met in Washington, a senator's daughter who shared his passion for reform. Clara published her third novel and moved to San Francisco to be part of the literary scene. Thomas, now a veterinarian, set up practice in Reno. William, after law school, returned to Nevada to practice and advocate for water rights and land conservation. In 1905, Xavier and Penelope became grandparents for the first time when James and his wife had a daughter. They traveled to Washington for the birth, and Xavier held his granddaughter with the same wonder he had felt holding his own children. Penelope, watching her husband coo at the baby, felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. "We did this," she whispered. "We built this family, this legacy." "You did this," Xavier corrected gently. "You had the courage to leave behind everything you knew and start over. All I did was fall in love with you." "All you did was see me," she said. "That was everything." They returned to the ranch, to the life they had built and the land they loved. The work was easier now, with good managers and systems in place, giving them time for each other and for the pursuits they enjoyed. Xavier had taken up woodworking, crafting furniture with patient precision. Penelope continued her charitable work and had begun writing her own memoir, not for publication but for her children and grandchildren, so they would understand where they came from. On a spring morning in 1907, Xavier woke to find Penelope still sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the early light. They were both past 60 now, their hair silver, their bodies marked by age and labor. But when she opened her eyes and smiled at him, he saw the same woman he had fallen in love with 30 years earlier. "Good morning," she murmured. Good morning, my love. How did you sleep? Wonderfully. I dreamed we were young again, just starting out. Would you want to go back? Xavier asked. If you could, would you change anything? Penelope considered this seriously, as she considered all questions. Then she shook her head. No. Every choice, every struggle, every moment of joy and pain, it all brought us here, to this life, this love. I would not trade that for anything, not youth, not immortality, not all the money in the world. Even though you had to scrub dishes and nearly work yourself to death, especially because of that, she said. It taught me what truly matters, that I am strong enough to survive anything. That love and work and purpose are worth more than any fortune. That you, she reached up to touch his face, are the greatest gift I ever received. He kissed her softly. The feeling is entirely mutual. They rose and dressed, moving through their morning routine with the easy synchronicity of 3 decades together. Breakfast on the porch, watching the sun climb over the mountains. A walk around the property, checking on things more from habit than necessity. Lunch with whatever ranch hands and family members happened to be around. Afternoons spent on their separate pursuits, always coming together for dinner and the evening hours. It was a good life, a full life, built on foundations of honesty and love and mutual respect. Penelope had come to Verdi with millions of dollars hidden behind a mask of poverty, and she had discovered that the real wealth was in the people and the place and the man who had loved her without knowing or caring about her money. Xavier had met a woman dressed plain who spoke humble, and he had found a partner who matched him in every way that mattered. As the years continued to unfold, they faced them together, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would handle it as they always had, with love, with courage, and with unwavering commitment to each other and the life they had chosen. Their story became the story they told their grandchildren, a testament to the power of authenticity and the enduring strength of true love. And on warm summer evenings, sitting on the porch of the ranch house with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Xavier and Penelope would hold hands and watch the world turn, grateful for every moment they had been given, every choice that had led them to each other, every day of the life they shared. The ranch continued to thrive under their stewardship, a testament to careful management and the deep respect they held for the land. In 1910, when Penelope turned 63 and Xavier turned 66, they made the decision to step back from daily operations, turning over management to William, who had returned to Nevada with his new wife to take over the family business. It was time, they agreed, to truly enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. James came home that summer with his family, now including 3 children, and they had a grand reunion. All 4 of Xavier and Penelope's children gathered at the ranch with their families, filling the house with noise and laughter, and the particular chaos that comes from multiple generations under one roof. Penelope watched her grandchildren playing in the same yard where their parents had played, and she felt a profound sense of continuity and completion. "We have been so blessed," she told Xavier one night as they lay in bed listening to the house settle around them. "More than blessed," Xavier agreed. "We have been loved. We have loved well. That is the greatest gift anyone can have." In 1912, they celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the 2 of them. Penelope wore a dress of pale blue silk, expensive but simple, and Xavier wore the suit he saved for special occasions. They toasted each other with wine from their own vineyard, a venture they had started years earlier more as an experiment than a business. 34 years, Penelope mused. It seems impossible. It seems like yesterday we were standing in that church, so nervous and so certain all at once. I was not nervous, Xavier said. I was the most certain I had ever been about anything. Liar. You were trembling when you put the ring on my finger. That was not nerves. That was emotion. There is a difference, she laughed, the sound still clear and bright despite the years. Perhaps. Tell me, Xavier Stanton, if you had known that day what you know now, all the struggles and triumphs, all the ways our life would unfold, would you still have married me? Without hesitation, he said immediately. Every single day I would choose you, every single time. Even knowing I came with millions of dollars and all the complications that brought, the money was never the point. You were the point. You are still the point. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar lines of her palm. You dressed plain and spoke humble, and I thought I was getting a simple woman who needed help. Instead, I got a woman of extraordinary complexity and strength, someone who challenged me and supported me and made me better than I ever could have been alone. The money just meant we had more resources to do good in the world. But I would have been just as happy with you if we had spent our whole lives ranching on a shoestring. I know, she said softly. That is why I love you. You never cared about the fortune. You only cared about me. Always, he said, until my last breath. In the spring of 1914, Penelope fell ill with pneumonia. For 2 weeks, she burned with fever while Xavier sat vigil by her bedside, bathing her face with cool cloths and willing her to fight to stay with him. The children came, gathering at the ranch in frightened clusters, and even the doctor looked grave. But Penelope was strong, strengthened by decades of love and purpose, and she pulled through, emerging weak and thin but alive. I am not done yet, she told Xavier when she was finally coherent again. I have more living to do with you. Good, he said, his voice rough with relief, because I am not ready to let you go, not for a very long time. She recovered slowly over the summer, regaining strength under Xavier's devoted care and the love of her family. By autumn, she was back to her usual routines, though she moved a bit more carefully now, conscious of her mortality in ways she had not been before. We should talk about what happens when one of us goes, she said one evening, and Xavier flinched. I do not want to talk about that. I know, but we must. We have built so much together, Xavier. We need to make sure it continues properly. She pulled out papers she had been working on with William. I have arranged for the foundation to continue with permanent funding. The ranch will stay in the family, managed by William and his children after him. The other children are all provided for independently. I want to make sure you are comfortable for the rest of your life, with everything you need. I do not need anything but you, Xavier said stubbornly. I know, my love, but someday one of us will have to go on without the other, and we owe it to each other to make that as bearable as possible. She took his hand. Promise me something. Promise me that if I go first, you will not stop living. You will stay connected to our children and grandchildren. You will take care of yourself. You will find joy where you can. Only if you promise me the same, he said. I promise. Though between us, I think you are likely to outlive me. You are 3 years older and twice as stubborn. We will go together, Xavier said, old and gray and still holding hands. It was a beautiful dream, and they both wanted it to be true. But life rarely arranges itself according to our wishes. In March of 1916, Xavier was thrown from a horse while checking the north pasture. The horse had been spooked by a rattlesnake, and Xavier, who had been riding for 50 years, was simply not as fast or flexible as he once had been. He broke several ribs and his collarbone, and the doctor suspected internal injuries. Penelope never left his side during the week he lingered, holding his hand and talking to him about their life together, reminding him of moments both monumental and mundane. The children came, bringing grandchildren to say goodbye, and Xavier drifted in and out of consciousness, smiling when he heard familiar voices. On the morning of March 17th, with spring sunshine streaming through the bedroom window and Penelope sitting beside him as she had for their entire marriage, Xavier drew his last breath. His final words, whispered with great effort, were, "Love you, always loved you." "And I you," Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. "Forever, my darling, forever." The funeral was held on a bright spring day, attended by what seemed like half of Nevada. People came from all over the territory to pay respects to a man who had been respected and loved by all who knew him. They buried Xavier in the small cemetery plot on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree he had planted 40 years earlier, and Penelope stood dry-eyed through the service, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. But that night, alone in the house that suddenly seemed far too large, she wept as she had not wept since her father died. She wept for the loss of her partner, her love, her truest friend. She wept for all the years they would not have together, all the moments they would not share. She wept until she had no tears left, and then she sat in the darkness and remembered. She remembered a young man tipping his hat to her in a dusty street, showing her respect when she was just a dishwasher. She remembered his proposal, so earnest and heartfelt, asking her to marry him even though he thought she had nothing. She remembered the first time he kissed her, the first time he told her he loved her, the way he had believed her impossible story without hesitation. She remembered their wedding day, the birth of each of their children, decades of shared meals and shared work and shared dreams, and she remembered his final words, the truth that had defined their entire life together: love. Simple, profound, enduring love. The days and weeks that followed were difficult. Penelope moved through them in a fog of grief, supported by her children who took turns staying with her, making sure she ate and slept and did not retreat too far into her sorrow. Slowly, very slowly, the sharp edges of pain began to dull into something more bearable, a persistent ache rather than a consuming agony. She began to find her way back to living, not because the grief lessened, but because she had promised Xavier she would. She spent time with her grandchildren, teaching them to garden and cook, telling them stories about their grandfather. She continued her charitable work, finding purpose in helping others. She wrote letters to old friends and made new connections. She lived as she had promised she would. In the summer of 1917, Clara came to visit and found her mother working in the garden, dirt under her fingernails and a look of peaceful concentration on her face. "You look well, Mother," Clara said, relieved. "I am surviving," Penelope said. "Some days are harder than others, but I am managing. Your father would not want me to stop living just because he is gone. He loved you so much, and I him. That does not end just because death separates us. The love remains." Penelope stood, brushing dirt from her dress. "Come inside. I will make tea and you can tell me about your new book." Life continued. William and his wife had another child, a daughter they named Penelope. James was appointed to a senior position in the Department of Agriculture. Thomas opened a second veterinary practice. Clara's novels continued to gain popularity, and she had become something of a celebrity in literary circles. The family thrived, carrying forward the values Xavier and Penelope had instilled in them: integrity, compassion, hard work, and love. On what would have been their 40th wedding anniversary, Penelope went to Xavier's grave with a bouquet of wildflowers. She sat on the bench William had built beside the plot and talked to her husband as though he could hear her. 40 years, my love. Can you believe it? 40 years since we stood in that little church and promised forever. You kept your promise. You loved me faithfully and well for every single day we had together. I miss you more than words can express. I miss your laugh and your touch, and the way you would look at me as though I was the most precious thing in the world. I miss our talks on the porch, and the way you would reach for my hand without thinking, even after all those years." She paused, listening to the wind in the cottonwood leaves. "But I want you to know I am all right. I am living the life we planned, surrounded by our family, doing the work we believed in. You are with me in every sunset I watch from our porch, every meal I cook in our kitchen, every moment I spend with our children and grandchildren. You are woven into every part of my life, and that will never change." She stayed until the sun began to set, then walked back to the house, feeling lighter than she had in months. She had said what needed to be said, had honored the love they shared while acknowledging that she must continue forward. It was what Xavier would have wanted, what he had made her promise. The years that followed were gentler. Penelope settled into a comfortable rhythm, dividing her time between the ranch and visits to her children. She published her memoir in 1920, not for public consumption, but as a private printing for family and close friends. She called it A Plain Life Richly Lived, and it told the story of her journey from San Francisco heiress to Nevada rancher, from isolation to deep connection, from fear to love. In 1925, Penelope celebrated her 78th birthday surrounded by her children, 14 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Looking around at the gathering, at the faces that carried forward her legacy and Xavier's, she felt a profound sense of completion. They had built something lasting, she and Xavier. Not just wealth or property, but a family grounded in love and purpose. That night, sitting alone on the porch and watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Penelope felt Xavier's presence so strongly it was almost as though he sat beside her. "We did well, didn't we?" she whispered to the night. "The girl who dressed plain and spoke humble, and the cowboy who loved her anyway. We built a good life, you and I." The wind seemed to answer, rustling through the trees he had planted, and Penelope smiled. Penelope Morgan Stanton lived another 3 years, dying peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1928. She was 81 years old, and she had lived a life that spanned the transformation of the West from frontier to modernity. Her children buried her beside Xavier under the cottonwood tree, and on her headstone they inscribed the words she had requested. She lived humbly, loved deeply, and gave generously. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. The ranch stayed in the family, as did the charitable foundation that continued to fund education and opportunity throughout Nevada and beyond. The story of Penelope and Xavier became part of family lore, passed down through generations. The story of an heiress who disguised herself as a poor woman to escape a gilded cage, and the cowboy who fell in love with her for who she was rather than what she had. It was a story about the power of authenticity, the importance of seeing people truly, and the enduring strength of love built on mutual respect and partnership. In the end, Penelope had found exactly what she had been searching for when she climbed down from that dusty mule in Verdi, Nevada in 1878. She had found freedom. She had found purpose. And she had found a love that transcended wealth and status and time itself. A love that endured beyond death and lived on in the family and community they had built together. The fortune she had inherited, the millions of dollars that had once seemed like a burden, became a tool for creating lasting good in the world. But the true wealth, the treasure that could not be measured in money, was the life she had lived with Xavier. The decades of partnership and passion, the children they had raised, the land they had stewarded, the love they had shared so completely that it became the foundation of everything else. Years later, her great-great-grandchildren would read her memoir and learn about the woman who had dressed plain and spoken humble while carrying more money than the whole town. and they would understand the lesson she had tried to teach. That worth has nothing to do with wealth, that love sees the heart rather than the trappings, and that a life well lived is measured not in dollars but in relationships nurtured, kindness shown, and love given without reservation. And on summer evenings at the ranch, when the sun sets in gold and rose behind the Sierra Nevada peaks, and the wind whispers through the old cottonwood trees, those who know the story sometimes feel the presence of two souls who loved deeply and lived fully, forever entwined in the land they cherished and the legacy they left behind. Xavier and Penelope, the cowboy and the heiress, partners in life and love, together even in eternity,